All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are going on an absolutely awe-inspiring journey, tracking a massive cosmic arc that stretches from the terrifying primordial deep all the way to our final cosmic destinies, destinies of blinding light and absolute darkness. This is, at its core, a story about God's absolute sovereignty. It covers everything from the very dawn of creation to the literal end of days. And honestly, it's a narrative that's going to force us to ask some massive, heavy questions about ultimate justice, divine power, and exactly where humanity fits into this grand cosmic architecture. Our story begins way, way before the dawn of human existence. We're talking about a vast, boundless universe of heaving black water that ancient Hebrew texts call tohu vabohu. Now, this wasn't just an empty room waiting to be filled. It was a completely formless, structureless abyss of pure chaos. Just imagine, if you can, an ocean with absolutely no shores, completely devoid of light. That is the wild stage for our cosmic drama. And the Spirit of God hovered over it, contemplating something vast and, frankly, dangerous.
Section 1. The Primordial Chaos Monsters.
So right inside that terrifyingly empty abyss we were just imagining, God essentially forges two physical, massive apex predators entirely out of the raw material of chaos itself. We know them as the primordial monsters of the ancient world, and the vocabulary used to describe them in the source texts is absolutely fascinating. Take Behemoth. It's actually a plural of majesty in Hebrew. That means it's not just a beast, it is the supreme beast, the ultimate terrestrial titan. And Leviathan, well, that comes from a root word meaning to twist or coil. Now, let's be clear. These weren't metaphors. They weren't just big, normal animals like hippos or crocodiles. They were literal biological forces of nature with a physical mass that completely defied the scale of human existence. If we trace the timeline of these titans through extra-biblical texts like 1 Enoch, it reveals a truly shocking destiny. They actually began as a bonded pair, born right into that primordial deep. But they were so incredibly massive that they literally had to be separated. From there, they are preserved in divine containment. God essentially puts them on ice, where they're waiting for their ultimate, terrifying destiny, which is slaughter at the end of days. Section 2. God's absolute sovereignty. You know the story of Job, right? The guy is going through unimaginable suffering, and when he finally demands an explanation from God, God answers him from a whirlwind. But he doesn't point Job to a mountain or a star. He points him directly to these untamable creatures, and their physical scale is just staggering. The sheer mass of Behemoth and the fire-breathing terror of Leviathan were so destructive that God actually had to sever them from each other just to prevent the complete destabilization of early Earth. Behemoth gets exiled to a vast desert called Dendane. Its tail swung like a massive cedar tree, and it had these incredible hollow tube-like bones just to bear its immense weight. I mean, honestly, think of a massive sauropod dinosaur. Then you have Leviathan, cast into the ocean abyss. It featured impenetrable, interlocking double armor, and its breath. Its breath was a literal biological flamethrower that made the deep sea boil like a cauldron. No way you're messing with that. And God just brilliantly taunts human hubris here. He essentially asks, hey, can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Obviously, the answer is a resounding no. Any human weapons, whether it's swords, iron, bronze, they're treated like absolute straw by these titans. So the really crucial point God is making to Job is this. If you can't even leash the beasts I created for sport, how can you possibly evaluate the architecture of my justice? It is the ultimate mic drop on God's sovereignty over chaos. It completely forces humanity to recognize our incredibly small footprint in a universe that is populated by divine titans. Section 3, the Messianic Banquet, the Feast of Light. Okay, so what actually happens to these unstoppable forces of chaos in the end? They certainly aren't eternal rivals to God. No, they are creatures with a definitive expiration date. According to the Talmud and various apocryphal texts, God steps in as a cosmic butcher. He slaughters these terrors with his divine sword and transforms them into an epic feast for the righteous. It's this wild eschatological culinary event. The meat of the monsters is served up at the banquet. Leviathan's totally impenetrable skin is repurposed into a protective canopy for the faithful. And get this, its supernaturally glowing scales are draped right over the walls of Jerusalem to literally illuminate the entire holy city. I love this part because it perfectly captures the whole theology of the banquet. Think about it. This slaughtered dragon provides both blessing as a protective shelter, kind of like a shield of divine favor, And it provides light through its glowing scales, revealing truth and dispelling the darkness of ignorance. The supreme predator of the deepest abyss is suddenly repurposed to become the literal roof and light bulb for God's redeemed people. Chaos isn't just destroyed here, it is entirely subjugated and completely flipped around for human flourishing.
Section 4. The Outer Darkness.
Now, picture this blindingly radiant feast we just talked about. Well, just outside of it lie the terrifying, cold voids of divine judgment. The contrast is sharp and, honestly, pretty sobering. In the Gospel of Matthew alone, there are exactly 3 parables where Jesus explicitly warns about being cast out of the kingdom's joyous feasts and thrown out into an outer darkness. So, what are we really talking about here? This outer darkness is literally situated completely outside the brilliantly lit banquet. It represents a total, devastating separation from God's cheering, immediate presence. It is a scene of utter despair, representing the profound spiritual emptiness that follows the loss of divine favor and inclusion. And those cast out into this darkness, they experience weeping, which represents profound sorrow, and the gnashing of teeth. Now that denotes intense self-anger, immense frustration, and just pure agony over what has been lost. Now here is where it gets super interesting. Theologians actually really debate this exact judgment. Some view the outer darkness as eternal damnation. They see it as completely synonymous with hell and the final inescapable judgment for unbelievers. But on the flip side, others argue it's simply a profound, tearful exclusion from the banquet for those who are saved but who are unfaithful or entirely unprepared. In the second view, a believer might completely miss out on the immense rewards and joy of the feast. They're stuck, standing in the dark outside, full of deep regret, before God eventually comes and wipes away every tear in the new heaven and earth.
Section 5. The Blackest Darkness. But here's the thing. No matter where you land on the outer darkness debate, Scripture actually reveals an even more terrifying degree of void that is reserved for the truly apostate. The Greek phrase is zophos tou skotos, meaning the blackest darkness. This is not just standing outside a brightly lit house feeling regret. No. This is an absolute, inescapable, eternal gloom. It represents ultimate spiritual despair and permanent final separation from God. It's a profound darkness that is literally physically felt. It's an ultimate lights out forever scenario signaling final, unalterable doom.
Jude actually uses this incredibly haunting ancient imagery to describe this. He talks about wandering stars burning out into a permanent chaotic void. And he uses this to describe the inescapable fate of rebellious angels and false teachers. Just think of a shooting star. It flashes briefly and brilliantly in the sky and then vanishes forever into the cold, silent night. That is the fate of these false teachers. They plunge into an eternal gloom. It is the complete, total, and permanent absence of light, warmth, and divine presence. So, to put it all together and compare these 2 realms, a really crucial distinction emerges. One realm is a tragic, regretful exclusion directly outside the glowing feast, where unprepared guests weep with profound frustration. But the other, the blackest darkness, is the total, permanent annihilation of light. It's an eternal gloom reserved exclusively for apostates, false teachers, and fallen angels. It is a deeply terrifying gradient of divine judgment. So as we wrap up this explainer today, the sheer, unimaginable scale of God's sovereignty leaves us with a pretty chilling ultimate question about our own place in his cosmic order. God commands the primordial monsters of chaos, and he alone dictates the absolute boundaries of light and darkness. Knowing that the feast is actively being prepared, where do you stand? Are you destined for the radiant light and blessing of the banquet? Or are you wandering toward the terrifying shadows outside? It's a massive, awe-inspiring thought to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.